This lesson is Unit 1, Lesson 4, The History of Life on Earth. If you're following along in your text, this is on page 38. The essential question for this lesson is how has life on Earth changed over time? By the end of this lesson, you should be able to describe the evolution of life on Earth over time using the geologic timescale. So we're going to look at uncovering clues on page 40. So how do we learn about this ancient life? Paleontologists use fossils to reconstruct the history of life. A fossil is a trace or an imprint of a living thing that is preserved by geologic processes. Fossils of a single-celled organism date back as far as 3.8 billion years. So what can we learn from fossils? All of the fossils that have been discovered worldwide make up the fossil record. Examining the fossil record helps scientists identify when different species lived and died. There are two ways to describe the ages of fossils. Relative dating determines whether or not a fossil formed before or after another fossil formed. Newer fossils are found in the layers of rock that are above older fossils. Absolute dating estimates the age of a fossil in years. Estimations are based on information from radioactive elements, such as carbon-12, in certain rocks near the fossil. What can relative dating and absolute dating tell us about these fossils? The fossil record gives evidence of many of the different organisms that have lived during Earth's long history. Changes in population can be preserved in fossils over many generations. Some species are present in the fossil record for a short period of time, while others survive for long time spans without much change. An extinction happens when every individual of a species dies. A mass extinction occurs when a large number of species go extinct during a relatively short amount of time. Gradual environmental changes and catastrophic events, such as the impact of an asteroid, can cause mass extinctions. Extinctions and mass extinctions are documented in the fossil record. Fossils that were common in certain rock layers may decrease in frequency and eventually disappear altogether. Evidence in the fossil record helps scientists form hypotheses about how and when species went extinct. So, what is the geologic timescale? I'm on page 42 in your text. The geologic timescale is a standard method used to divide Earth's 4.6 billion year natural history into manageable parts. Paleontologists adjust and add details to the geologic timescale when new evidence is found. The early history of Earth has been poorly understood because fossils from this time span are rare. Boundaries between geologic time intervals correspond to significant changes in Earth's history. Some major boundaries are defined by mass extinctions or other significant changes in the number of species. Some boundaries are defined by major changes in Earth's surface or climate. The largest divisions of the geologic timescale are eons, which are divided into eras. Eras are characterized by the type of organism that dominated Earth at that time. Eras are further divided into periods, and periods are divided into epochs. The four major divisions that make up the history of life on Earth are Precambrian time and the Paleozoic, Mesozoic, and Cenozoic eras. So what's defined as Precambrian time? On page 44. Precambrian time started 4.6 billion years ago when Earth formed and is made up of the first 3 eons of Earth's history. Prokaryotes, a single-celled organism without a nucleus, were the first dominant life form. They lived in the ocean, and the earliest prokaryotes lived without oxygen. Fossil evidence suggests that prokaryotes called cyanobacteria appeared over 3 billion years ago. Cyanobacteria use sunlight to make their own food. This process releases oxygen, which did not exist in Earth's atmosphere at this time. Eventually, oxygen built up in the ocean and air and formed ozone, a gas layer in the upper atmosphere. Increased oxygen allowed for the evolution of new species that used oxygen to live. After about 1 billion years, new types of organisms evolved. These organisms, called eukaryotes, have cells with a nucleus and other complex structures. Later, eukaryotic organisms evolved that were multicellular or made up of more than one cell. For some organisms, oxygen is toxic. Therefore, the increased oxygen was also followed by extinction of some organisms. Less is known about the Precambrian life because microscopic organisms did not preserve well in the fossil record. So what is defined as the Paleozoic era on page 45 in your text? The Paleozoic era began about 542 million years ago. Rocks from this era are rich in fossils of animals such as sponges, corals, snakes, and trilobites. Fish and sharks, the earliest animals with backbones, appeared during this era. Plants, fungi, and their air-breathing animals colonized land during the Paleozoic era. Land dwellers had adaptations that allowed them to survive in a drier environment, and plant groups appeared. Crawling insects were among the first animals to live on land, followed by large salamander-like animals. What adaptations would have allowed organisms to migrate from oceans to land? The Permian mass extinction took place at the end of the Paleozoic era and is known as the largest mass extinction. By 251 million years ago, as many as 96% of marine species had become extinct. The mass extinction wiped out entire groups of marine organisms, oceans were completely changed, and many species became extinct. So what defined the Mesozoic era? Starting on page 46. Scientists think that reptiles that survived the Paleozoic era evolved into many different species during the Mesozoic era. Dinosaurs are the best known reptiles that evolved during the Mesozoic era. The first birds and mammals also appeared. The most important plants of this era were conifers, or cone-bearing plants, which formed large forests. Flowering plants appeared later. Evidence shows that an asteroid hit Earth around the Mesozoic era. This impact caused giant dust clouds and worldwide fires. With the sunlight blocked by dust, many plants would have died. Without plants, plant-eating dinosaurs would have died, along with meat-eating dinosaurs that ate the other dinosaurs. So what defines the Cenozoic era on page 47 in your text? The Cenozoic era, in which mammals dominate, began 65 million years ago and continues today. Humans appeared during this era. The climate has changed many times during the Cenozoic. Organisms migrated toward the equator, adapted to the cold, or became extinct. Primates are a group of mammals that included humans, apes, and monkeys. Primates have eyes that are in the front of their head. Most primates have 5 flexible fingers. One of them is an opposable thumb. Primates' ancestors were probably nocturnal, mouse-like mammals. Millions of years after dinosaurs died out, primates with larger brains